So I've invited Beatriz Ceja to end our Hispanic Heritage Month series. And I know she's an innovative speaker, so I'll share a little bit about her recent title change. So Beatriz Ceja-Williams is the Senior Director, Institutional Service of the Office of Post-Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to that, she was the Director of Hispanic-Serving Institutions Division in the Office of Post-Secondary Education. The HSID is responsible for the administration of the developing Hispanic-serving institutions, promoting post-baccalaureate opportunities for Hispanic Americans, and the HSI STEM and Articulation programs. Prior to this role, she served as a program manager for the teacher quality programs in the Office of Innovation and Improvement. As a program manager, she oversaw the administration of several discretionary programs, including Race to the Top District, Teacher Quality Partnership, School Leadership, Supporting Effective Educators, and Transition to Teaching. Ms. Ceja-Williams has also served as the federal liaison to the states of Florida, Arizona, New Mexico, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico for the U.S. Department of Education's Migrant Education Program. She earned her BA in sociology from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and her Master of Arts in Education and Human Development, with an emphasis in bilingual education and special education from George Washington University. Without further ado, Beatriz Ceja-Williams.
So as was mentioned, my name is Beatriz Ceja-Williams, and I am very honored to be with you today. As many of you know, we are at the end of the Hispanic Heritage Month. Technically, we've ended, but I think I applaud you for extending it a couple more days. So normally it's from September 15th through October 15th. So it overlaps 2 months. Initially, Hispanic Heritage Month was actually Hispanic Heritage Week, which later was then expanded to a month. Currently serve as in the Senior Executive Service. I'm a member of the Senior Executive Service at the U.S. Department of Education, and my role is Senior Director for Institutional Service, which is the side of the house of the U.S. Department of Education that oversees a number of discretionary grants to minority-serving institutions. Minority-serving institutions are made up of the HBCU community, the tribally controlled colleges and universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, Asian American, Native Alaskan, Pacific Islander serving institutions, predominantly Black institutions, Native Hawaiian, Native Alaskan serving institutions. And if you're kind of following along, I keep using the term serving institutions, right? That these are institutions that are, in essence, serving a minority community. These programs were enacted in the Higher Education Act and have since been funded under our appropriations, our annual appropriations. Many of these institutions are considered minority serving institutions because of their enrollment, right? They have the designated enrollment for what the law has said will then designate them that particular classification. So for Hispanic serving institutions, institutions must have a 25% undergraduate enrollment. In addition, these institutions have to serve high percent of low-income students, as well as have low general expenditures. Currently, we've identified about 530 institutions that meet that criteria. That said, these institutions doesn't necessarily mean that they are graduating the individuals. Unfortunately, while we have seen an increase in the number of Latinos, and I'm going to use Latinos and Hispanics interchangeably. Historically, we've seen an increase in educational attainment for Hispanic Americans. We went from having one of the highest dropout rates to closing, in essence, close to closing that gap in terms of high school graduation, or about close to 90% with high school graduation. Again, unfortunately, while the number of Hispanic serving institutions increases, we're not necessarily there when it comes to bachelor attainment. Currently, Latinos hold about 20% of Latinos hold a bachelor's degree. Now that's an increase from about 15, it went from 15% to about 20% in from 2011 to 2020, which is where we have the data for at this time. And so I bring all that to say that for the Latino community, one of the key reasons why many Latinos immigrate, the history around the community has centered on the importance of education. And while the statistics don't necessarily show that result of how valuable the community considers education, it's definitely something that is worth noting. I myself am a first-generation college student. My parents immigrated to the US when I was about 1 year old. My parents had everything against them. They were teenage parents, had about a 6th grade education, and made it to the US. Today, we are 9. Our family grew. We were originally 3, now 9. And while I was the first one to graduate from college in my family, I certainly wasn't the last. I opened up the pathway for a lot of my siblings to follow. And part of the reason was because of my parents noting that once you have an education, no one can take that away. And so I started off talking about minority serving institutions, the number of institutions that have high enrollment of not just Hispanic, but other minorities. And while these institutions have high enrollments, they're not necessarily graduating all of their students. That is where a lot of the discretionary grants that we oversee at the Department of Education, that's where that funding goes to support. So that funding supports wraparound services, it supports tutoring, it supports a number of initiatives to help students graduate. I emphasize serving institutions because unfortunately for a number of these institutions, they have the enrollment numbers that designate them as a minority serving institution. However, they don't necessarily serve the student and meet the students where they are. And so our job is to help make the connections that while the students are enrolling at these institutions at higher rates than they are at other institutions, that the institution has a responsibility to support the students to and through. Because I believe that no one shows up on their first day of college saying, I can't wait to drop out. You know, everyone shows up with a hope and a dream of graduating. And so my job is to help bring that message to the institutions that if you're enrolling the student, if you're sending that student a letter that says you're accepted at our institution, then that institution has a responsibility to support that student, meet that student where they are, and help them to graduate. And that's where our discretionary dollars go to. The other part that's important, not just for the Latino community, but for all of us here, is that 1 in 4 of students in K-12 are Latino. And so that means that that's that population that's growing. That's the population that is going to be joining our workforce. So we have a choice here. Our choice would be to allow the statistics to remain as they are, or to continue as a whole supporting these types of programs, supporting institutions that provide those services to minority students so that they can graduate, because our workforce needs a more educated workforce. So I say all this because while at the Department of Education, I came to the department, I would say accidentally. I came and I did a 9-month fellowship program with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. I didn't even know jobs in DC existed. I was from LA, and I just said, working at the department seems like fun. Let me go ahead and try to apply. I did. I started off as and for those of you in DC, you know what the GS scales are. So I, started off at the GS7 and worked at various parts of the department, the Office of Migrant Education, teacher quality programs, principal development, and now in higher education. Those moves have been intentional, again, beginning from that start that education is important. Once educated, no one can take that away from you. And so I continue in that act of service. So when one of the speakers that was up here said that you guys were doing grants in support of students and scholarships, in essence, that's what I do. We provide discretionary funding to institutions of higher education, specifically minority-serving institutions, to support students to and through degree completion, in hopes that we continue to move the needle from 20% to, hopefully 90%. That's a big wish, but I really believe that any student that steps on a campus should be supported again to and through so that they have that degree. I've spoken just a little pieces here and there, a little bit about me, a little bit about what I do, because I was told to leave enough room for questions. So I hope that I've given you enough pieces for you in case you have any questions. I want to make sure that I'm able to take your question.
A key factor in how well children learn is the language in which they're being taught, whether they go to school, whether they understand, whether they learn much, whether they stay in school. Can you tell us in a few words the successes and/or failures of bilingual education in California? I think you were involved in that earlier.
So I would speak to its success because I'm living proof, right? I'm bilingual. When I first went to school at the time, and I'm now dating myself, there were very limited bilingual programs. And so when I started school, I was in what they called a pullout program. There would be a literacy coach that would come in, take students that did not have any English skills, English language skills, that pull them out, help them attain those skills for about an hour, and then put them back in the classroom. So I played a lot of catch up as a kid. Later, school districts started to include what they called early bilingual ed, where they taught the student in their native language in kindergarten, first and second and third grade. Third grade was the point where they then transitioned students over to English language. The philosophy and theories being that the student is hearing Spanish at home. We're going to build their literacy skills in their native language, because once you have those literacy skills, it is a lot easier to then transition into a second language. Nowadays, you have a number of dual language programs where in some schools they have two teachers, one that is the English speaking teacher, one that's the Spanish speaking teacher. And they teach all the subject areas in both English and Spanish. And that's mainly in the primary schools, K through 8th grade and some of the charter schools. In high school, then you get into the foreign language. But as a whole, the US is really one of the only countries that doesn't require its citizens to be bilingual. Most of the other countries, every student speaks a second language. In many of the developed countries, they pick up English. Many speak English, many speak the language that their native language, and then the language of that particular country. So, like I said, I'm only speaking to the pros of it because I am a believer in bilingualism.
Thank you for being with us today. I was a college professor for 40 years. I'm very interested in the concept of accountability in those institutions serving and not graduating students. How do you address the issue of getting that job accomplished? Because it takes more than a village to change a school over time. I learned that over 4 decades of teaching.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, a lot of our funding is discretionary. So what that means is that not every institution that meets the criteria of a minority serving institution gets the additional federal funding. They actually have to compete for the funding. Those that are awarded the grant, then we're able to hold them accountable for the metrics that they proposed in their grant application. It's hard. I think universities as a whole are trying to see how they hold themselves accountable for increasing their graduation rates, because unfortunately, one of the areas of need right now is re-engaging students. There are many students that have disengaged from their college trajectory as a result of COVID. So a lot of colleges are suffering decreases in enrollment, which translates to funding for many of them. And so that's work in progress. Hopefully, we can start with the ones that we fund that are awarded the discretionary grants, and we'll be able to see increases at those schools of the number of students that graduate.
Sure. The previous question was actually fairly similar to what I was going to ask, but in a different way. It seems like we also have this issue in education where we have the internet and lots of information sources, not all verified, and some where you get snippets of things taken out of context. And how does this influence? Because I know I've seen, like, for example, if you look at Ray Dalio's recent publication about the changing world order, he specifically talks about, how education plays a factor in most developing countries and how they overall prosper within the cycle. And when you look at all these things, to me, contextually, how is education dealing with kind of the information overload that is there now? Because you have so many sources of information, and many of which are correct, but in the right context. How does that play at all into sometimes the metrics that either end up being met or not met? Are those pressures being felt in your education programs or by the people serving? I don't know if that is something you deal with or you can respond to.
Well, I think as a whole, we have and I'm gonna call it information literacy challenge, that the internet is so full of information that it actually requires some skills in determining and verifying what is truth and what isn't. And unfortunately, I don't know that a number of our teacher preparation programs are providing the preparation of the teachers to then provide and develop the skill sets for our students to be able to make those determinations of how do you verify truth in everything that you see on social media and everything that you see in the internet. I think we all have a responsibility. I don't think it's just the responsibility of a school in the school setting. I think we all have a responsibility to promote what has been verified as truth and to sort of leave behind what we know to be maybe someone's personal opinion, or at least to categorize it as such. So I think even as adults, there's a lot of digital literacy, I'm gonna call it, that we need to also build for ourselves and then help others with. So I don't know if that responded to your question, but I definitely see it as a challenge. We do have a grant that just became available for digital literacy. We are hoping that through some of our discretionary grants that we provide funding so that institutions of higher education can stress test some ideas of how to do it. But I don't have any concrete answers as of yet.
It does answer my question. It's just being an engineer, we have a lot of peer-reviewed studies and other things like that. But the other thing I know about doing research is it's usually so particular, because to study something, you have to know, it's a very finite set of conditions and tests. And then you get an outcome, and the outcome is true under those specific conditions. And I guess, yeah, what you said is right. I think you have to learn to take information within its context. But I just wasn't sure if that was kind of one of the bigger overarching goals within education, especially as you're looking to serve these communities that are in need. I would think that understanding how to disseminate information would be a key item, which it sounds like you're doing so, or at least trying to move towards. Thank you.
What they're doing is very admirable. I really like what you're doing. It's very powerful and important. I want to ask you, in this particular experience in helping kids to study, to concentrate, do you also give some attention to the emotional disturbances that can interfere with concentration and learning?
Actually, that has been a huge priority in this administration. We've invested dollars in social emotional learning. We've invested dollars for institutions to support mental health. And so that is one of the big priorities that we've had in a lot of our discretionary grants this year. So yes, we are working on that because we know it's not just about the academic technical aspect, that there are a lot of emotional, social challenges that students experience that they need to learn how to deal with them and keep going, right? So yes.
Max gets our last question for the day.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your work. You're excellent. I appreciate that. You talked a little bit about grants, and I just want to ask you this question. So Mayor Bowser just announced a program for 20,000 Black ownership of houses that is going to be implemented. And my concern was the Asian community, the Latino community wasn't involved in that. It's only Black owned people, which are all my friends, but where are we? And do you know anything about that?
So that's not part of my portfolio, but I think one of the things to your point is that when we talk about equity, it's about looking at the needs across, right? Where if the picture that you often see when people refer to equity are 3 kids trying to watch a baseball game, where if you gave every kid the same size stool, there would still be some kids that couldn't see, right? Like if you just gave me a stool, I probably still couldn't see over the fence. And so when we talk about equity is maybe the tallest individual here would need a stool. So that person would be okay not getting anything, right? Because the goal is, can you watch the game, over the fence? Another individual, maybe medium height, only needs 1 stool, while I may need 3. And so is the issue that why did she get 3? So-and-so didn't get anything, and this person only got 1. The issue, if we talk about equity, is did everyone get the support that they needed for the end goal? And the end goal was, can everybody watch the game over the fence? And so that's really what we're attempting to do in a lot of our grant making is how do we attempt to bring equity so that we can improve the educational conditions for all students? Because if we have a highly educated citizenry, we'll all benefit from it. So I end with that.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. And on behalf of the Rotary Club of Washington, D.C.'s nation's capital, Trees for the Capital program, I am giving you the certificate signifying our commitment to plant a tree in your honor to improve and beautify the environment. And we're so tech savvy now that you'll have GPS coordinates and we'll send those to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Give you honor right there.